And I was kind of like looking forward to this because I mean, our family is great at not fighting with each other, but we're not always great at actually talking about important things. And so, like what you were saying sometimes about this thing of just like, oh, we're going to record it, and so then it's easier in some ways to have the meaningful conversation. And so,
Hmm.
and I wanted to I thought it was important because I so mom and dad were just watching my thing about the boomers or whatever. And the thing is like when I put that out, it was because it was so foreign to me that I didn't realize how many other people my age have such a resentment and a disconnect from their parents. And I think that that is really something that needs to be addressed while we are able to, because eventually it won't be the case, and so I think that, um, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other parents that didn't know how their actions and their words have affected their kids, and they maybe didn't get the example to have that open and repentant posture, and you just
Hmm.
kind of get passed down this thing of because I said so,
Hmm.
and if no one's ever able to really ask the questions and wrestle with the questions of why, um, then things just keep going on the same. And
Hmm.
so I think that um, I think that there's probably definitely a lot of people my age that have a uncharitable view of what their parents experience, the experience they had,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that their parents probably too would like to have that connection, and so the parents need that just as much as the people my age do,
Yeah.
something to break the ice to get the communication going.
Yo. Hi, this is Paul. And a while ago, Michael messaged me and said something about, well, you giving all these people all this time, and I said, oh, Michael, you've certainly put in paid your dues here in the corner, and so then I gave him a slot, and then he said, oh, I'd really like your my dad to tell his story. So I thought, oh, that could be a lot of fun to have both of you here. So Michael's a well-known guy and been to a bunch of our events, and he's on the internet and YouTube. But TJ, you're new to us, and
Yes.
there's a lot of father-son interest in the corner. Um, so I thought, oh, this could be a lot of fun. So what do you know about what your son's been up to with this stuff?
Well, it's very interesting listening to him talk about his childhood, me, his mom, and etc. So it's been enlightening, fairly positive, I think. So we're okay. Michael is so intelligent. Sometimes he's a little hard to follow the full length of all that he has to say, but I try, and I get. I'm going to say I get most of it,
All
but
right.
yeah, yeah, it's
Well, we
interesting.
we we just have a group of friends on the internet basically, and then sometimes we do in real life events. And I can tell by your accent that you're from a place that I know fairly well. My mother lives up in Whitensville, so
Along with the Dutch Reform, Whitensville School.
yeah, that's it. You got it.
Okay,
You got it. So that's where my mother grew up, and my father grew up in the Midwest. His father was also a Christian Reformed minister, and as my father was, as I am. So that's that funny little tribe up in Whitensville with their few Christian Reformed churches, and then the big Whitensville Christian School that was just that thing has really grown a lot in the last number of years. But our goal is to get to know you. So, TJ, why don't you tell me a little bit about the home you grew up in?
okay. Well, second generation Italian Catholic. My both my parents, grandparents were from Italy. They were both bilingual. My father was born in 1915, my mother in 1917. they kind of came from the same province, but my mother's family was from the Adriatic side, and my father's family was from up a little further north in a place called Parma, from Parmesan cheese. And we lived in a 3-story house, and it had, my great grandfather was the first Sartori to live there, or I should say Cella. That's my paternal grandmother's family name. And a little different in terms of some of the food my father's family made and my mother's family made, but I got both. And a big trip at 3 years old was to slide down the banister to go see my aunt, my father's sister, and my grandmother, and it was absolutely wonderful.
Wow.
My father's dad and one of his sisters died in the influenza epidemic of 1919. My father was a World War II veteran. He was a sole surviving son. He never left the United States. 2 older brothers. I was not aware till after my mother passed, and actually one of my brothers had passed, that my mother apparently had a miscarriage between myself and my other brother, my closest brother. He was my closest brother, 6 years older than me. He was my first friend, really. He spent so much time with me, my first teacher. Just had a marvelous relationship with him.
What was his name?
Michael. my brother Michael.
Now, you were Italian Catholics. Did you go to church faithfully?
Oh, yes. And interestingly, it was an Italian parish. It was not a geographical limitation. It was an ethnic I don't know what you would call it, church. But actually, when I was growing up, the priest, the senior priest, was Father Sartori, which was a little confusing to some of my friends.
Well, if the priest is going to have a kid on the side, they're not going to give him his name.
Yeah. But Sartori is actually a very common name in Italy. Its translation is tailor. Oh. So as many tailors as you find in our phone book, that would be how many Sartoris there would be in an Italian phone book.
All right. And what was your religious life like? Did you observe, Fridays, the fast on Fridays?
Yeah. Although my mother's mother, who was a bit more notorious than my paternal grandmother, she ate fish on Thursday because it was fresher. Let me tell you, my grandmother on my mother's side was, well, a little crooked. That's the best way I can describe it. She was considerably above the law in many instances, and my mother wrote a little book about it. It's quite amusing. She had passed before I was born. We went to church every Sunday. We could walk to church. In fact, we did most times. Most of the times I went with my mom and dad. My brothers were altar boys. And occasionally I would they went to, like, I don't know, the 9 o'clock mass. Occasionally I would go with my aunt and my grandmother, which would have been the 10:15 mass or 11. And it was a high mass, and it was a Eucharistic mass. It's hard to realize this has been over 52 years since I practiced Catholicism. So I'm a little rusty. Anyway, I would go with my aunt and my grandmother, and I liked doing that. Not so much because the mass was longer by any means, but we stopped at a bakery shop between our house and there, and I got a chocolate-covered donut. So that was well worth the adventure, to say.
Absolutely.
I really enjoyed it. Of course, early as a child, the mass was in Latin. And, for example, my mother had a Latin English missal. I actually acquired, and I use that term rather loosely. I would say I probably stole it. But in any case, a little missile that was English and Latin. Anyway, so by the time I got to high school, and of course my brothers are 6 and 9 years older than me, and it's the 60s, and we had, well, it was okay to do things that were illegal if you didn't get caught, basically, and okay, and that was, kind of my mother's family's kind of background. I had a couple of uncles who were definitely into things, jukeboxes, cigarette machines, and pinball machines, and a few other notoriously questionable obtainers of goods, shall we say, and which sold for a reasonable price as opposed to what they were actually worth. Anyway, and I would say my description at some point along the line was pagan. I really didn't attend mass anymore. I got involved in the drug culture pretty heavily. My body is very susceptible to the effects of drugs. I could hallucinate on marijuana, and that's the old marijuana, not the new stuff. But was very deeply into that and alcohol. I think I started alcohol freshman, sophomore year. We used to steal a bit from each of our parents, and a group of us, and Friday nights we'd drink. And in fact, at one point, two of our buddies decided they'd make dandelion wine and fermented it under their bed, and we drank that on a couple of nights, which was also very interesting because of a particular incident. So we'd walk around in this north side of the town. I lived on the south side of town, the other side of the tracks, and pretty affluent, a lot of Jewish people. One of my best buddies was Jewish. And we used to walk around those neighborhoods. And of course, there was a playground nearby, and we'd stop there. And this one particular time we stopped there was this cute little girl. She was a freshman, I knew. I didn't really know her, but I knew she was a freshman. And I offered her a drink. And she said, "No, thanks. I have Jesus." And then my buddies called me away, and I was willing to, well, I kind of know who Jesus is, sort of thing. And that would be great. Anyway, so continued on with that subculture life, drinking predominantly. I got thrown out of school because of college, because I had unlimited cuts, and I did. And so I passed, I think, art history, and I think one other class. It was like I had a C and a D. My cum was less than 1. And the dean politely asked me in writing to leave. And I had to be out of school for at least a semester. It ended up being a year. I worked for Sears for 9 years, high school through college, and after marriage even. And during that time, one guy who was at work, the guy was an albino. I mean, he very distinctly, you could see him, long hair, and light skin and the whole deal. Anyway, this kid asked me for a ride home, and I at that time was not a particularly nice person. I was not a nice person at all, but I found myself saying yes to him. So I had a 69 maybe, no, not even that, 66 Rambler Ambassador convertible, and for my high school graduation, instead of an AM/FM radio, which was one of the gifts like my brothers would have gotten, and a watch, I got an 8-track cassette player for my car. And he gets in the car and he's going through the tapes. And one of the tapes I had, which a friend had given me, was Jesus Christ Superstar. Huh. And he says, "Boy, I'm really into that." And he plugs that in, and it's a pretty good soundtrack. Anyway, the theology, a little questionable, but not bad. So anyway, he starts talking to me, and he's talking about that he met these people, and he started going to these meetings with them, and that he didn't have faith. And he said he didn't know who Jesus was. Now, the minute he said that to me, that I thought particularly strange. The first thought was, is he Jewish? Muslim? You know, everybody knows who Jesus is. He's the Son of God. Anyway, so the conversation was really good. And I took him to our house. And my mom served us tea and raisin bread toast. And he shared the gospel with us and how he came to faith in Christ. That didn't quite do it for me, but it was intriguing, and I was very impressed with that.
What impressed you about it?
I think the sincerity of it and the excitement that he had for his relationship. See, now I'm looking back at it.
Yeah.
You know, at the time, I would say it stirred my heart. That would be the best way I could.
Because you didn't really describe yourself so much as a seeker. It sounds like you were having fun. You're sort of doing what everybody's doing.
Yeah.
And you've got a cool car. You've got an 8-track player in it. I mean, I'm maybe a little younger than you, but I remember the 60s and the 70s. And if in the early 70s you got an 8-track player in your car, you're doing all right.
Right.
And he's an albino, so that's that'll certainly stand out. But what did your mother make of it?
My mother was a fantastic person. We were notorious for what we later termed orphelines, you know, like people who didn't have a place to go for Christmas or Thanksgiving or anything like that. And all of my brothers and my friends on various occasions slept on our couch. Because they had to, problems at home or whatever. And she had a very accepting person. Later in life, she became a pink lady at the hospital for, I don't know, 20, 30 years almost. And it was just like, she could get information out of anybody at a drop of the hat. People just, talk to her and she listened. And so as a pink lady, she was the abuela to a whole bunch of the Candy Striper girls and what have you. And in fact, she even took a Spanish course so she could understand what they were saying. Yeah. So like I said, my mother was quite the character. So in the course of these events,
so what did this testimony from this albino, what was involved in that for him? He's just telling this story about how he found Jesus and started going to church and how this changed his life?
Yes.
Okay.
And the fact of going to church, that was kind of a normal thing for most of America and most of my neighborhood and friends and family. And that was pretty much it. He got fired or quit. I can't remember which. I think it was he got fired. And that was, I only, I see him at work for a little bit, but after that testimony, I didn't see him hardly at all. And then, like I said, he was gone. Huh. So that was fine.
Maybe he's an angel.
Now, somewhere in the midst of that, I decided that I would like to, I had a lot of anger. Incredible anger.
Okay.
In fact, most people were afraid of me in the depths of my anger. It was murderous.
What were you angry about?
Life.
Okay.
That was. I wasn't happy. That's part of it. Life was not going the way I wanted it to go.
Okay.
And somewhere in the midst of that, I got mugged. So my nose, Italian nose as it is, got altered a little bit with 5 stitches across the top of my nose. The guys, they were high. They had kind of run me off the road. I had my window down. They ran out of the car, ran over to my car, grabbed me by when I used to have hair, by the hair, pulled me out, a couple of chunks of hair, and started wailing on me. And of course, they split open my nose. They had cut somebody else off, and those guys had turned around and scared them off. So I wasn't very far from home. So I went home and I went to the sink to wash, I thought I had a bloody nose, basically. And when I felt up and it was, like a gash all the way across my nose, my father's in bed with my mother. We lived on the second floor. And I said, I think I have to go to the hospital. And sure enough, I did. 5 stitches later, that was all set. It was really interesting. When I got high, sometimes it was a bummer, really bad. And I thought I'd lose it. So I started reading my missal. Every missal has a gospel portion and an epistle portion, and sometimes even a psalm. And so I started reading that, and that brought me back to reality from the highs that I was in. Mm. And somewhere along the line, I figured, gee, I should read the Bible. It's, bestseller and all that kind of thing. An educated person, you should read the Bible. We had a Catholic Bible that I had convinced my mother to let us get at the S&H Green Stamp Redemption Center. How's that for a term? For one book that we had left over. And there, they put how many books it was for whatever it was on display. And I said, can we get this? And she said, sure. So we got it. And I remembered, we got a Bible downstairs in the bookcase. You should get that and start reading that. And of course, the one thing I can tell you from reading, and I read most of the New Testament, got a little bogged down in Corinthians because the printing was a little funky on the sides. I mean, what do you expect for one green stamp book? Anyway, and I really thought, my, how wonderful it would have been to have lived there in Israel at that time when Jesus walked the face of the earth. Little did I know that I would have a much more intimate relationship later on in life. So that's going on. And, I've got the 5 stitches and what have you. And still, I got back into college. I went from the place I worked. This is in Natick, Massachusetts. The college was Framingham State, was a college then, it's university now. And there's got to be 10 or so lights you have to go through. I couldn't find anybody to cover me for the appointment that I had with the dean until this guy walks in from the sales floor out to the shop, which is where I worked as a cashier. He says, I'll cover you. And he wasn't necessarily a particularly nice person either, but he was friendly to me. We weren't at odds by any way. And so he covered me. And I went from where I worked to the college without a single red light. And like I said, that had to be 10 lights at least that I went through. So I'm telling the dean, I'd like to go back to school, after being kicked out with a cumulus and 1. And, he listens to me and what I want to do. And I was a history major. And he says, I'll be right back. And he comes back and he says, I got you signed up for 3 courses. Usually it would be 4-course load. They're each worth 4 credits each. Yeah, it was a little different system, a little more intense. Yeah. And he says, I signed you up for 3 courses. He says, I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. He says, you're going to have to stay a history major because they won't let you in the elementary department with your grades. So I stayed in history and went back to school. Okay, so I'm still practicing my ungodly lifestyle. And it was the year of the embargo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the oil embargo.
Gas lines, even odd days.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who, this is one of our group, and he worked for Lowe's Theaters, and he used to get passes. And they closed the school shortly after Thanksgiving and wouldn't reopen until the 28th. All the state schools were shut down to save on the oil. Because in the Northeast, in the winter, you got to have an oil heat.
Yeah, the heat, yep.
So somewhere between Christmas and the 28th of January, he brought us to The Exorcist. front row. I'm praying my contact lenses will fall out. And it was just like, it was terrifying. And what came of it was I ended up, now I had dabbled in a little bit of the occult, and plus you're doing drugs. And let me tell you, that's pharmakia, that's witchcraft. And I was being tormented by a spirit, terribly, terribly terrorized. I couldn't sleep because I'd get woken up and be terrified by this spirit. And I started reading the Bible, and I kind of like the passages in First John. It was talking about children of God, which I really liked. But then it was talking about children of the devil, and I really didn't like those ones because basically the Holy Spirit was convicting me. Anyway, I went down to about 120 pounds, maybe a little less, and I wasn't very heavy to begin with, so it was noticeable. My parents noticed. I mean, I didn't even sleep in my own bed. I slept down on the couch in the den, and I had a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. I had heard a story. Now, this kid, I used to help get him to school in high school. He's a brilliant kid. And his father had died, and his mother really didn't have any control over him. In fact, I think he's one of the first people to introduce me to drugs. But anyway, a friend of mine, another, Italian from the neighborhood, like him and myself, and he says, yeah, he went back to school, and now he's selling real estate. He went to Harvard. Yeah, he did a CLEP program and got accepted in, and
Wow.
he finished it at Harvard. He was selling real estate. So I met him, and we're old friends. I've known him since like first grade.
Yeah.
And it's one of those kind of friendships that the minute you see him, you pick up from roughly where you left off, and you continue on. And so I'm telling him about this stuff. And I can remember having, interestingly enough, a conversation in a bar room with him. We were sitting at a booth, and I was talking about, I'm reading this book called Corinthians. I haven't figured out whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. He says, oh, yeah, that's a good thing. Anyway, so I let him know about what's going on here. And he says, why don't you come talk to the people I work with? And I'm thinking, I'm not going to go to some guy's work, talk to some strangers about my problems. Now, meantime, I had gone to confession with another friend and confessed my sins and whatever. And I told him, after I could remember as many of my sins as I could to confess, I said, I also went to this movie called The Exorcist, and it was about a person being demon possessed. And I'm hoping he's going to say to me, yeah, don't worry about that. That's not real. Nothing to worry about. But he says, well, that's in the Bible. That was not the answer I wanted to hear. And it was, again, kind of convicting, because really what struck me was this little girl who became possessed in the movie hadn't done anything wrong, and yet she's being possessed and tormented by a wicked devil. And here I am. I'm practically a criminal. I'd been arrested for drugs. My mother got our old den chief from Cub Scouts to be my lawyer, and I got off on probation for 6 months, and then it was dismissed. Anyway, and back then, if you were in the presence of marijuana, they could arrest you, number one. Number two, it was a felony. It was considered a controlled substance. The laws had not changed as lenient as they are these days, or even legal. And it just, kind of put another nail in my heart about I'm in tough shape here. So I don't want to go to this guy and his work, and I waited about 2 weeks, and things are not getting better. They're getting worse. And I finally says, okay, I'll come with you, meet your friends. Well, guess what the name of the real estate company is? Christian Realty. The owner's a Catholic charismatic. He got saved family-wise from the Duquesne outpouring amongst Catholics. It was a very interesting historical kind of phenomenon that occurred. And so he was there, what would I call him? An ex-alcoholic, basically, and Protestant background, evangelical Protestant background. And he had gotten saved. Actually, he had gotten healed and saved at a Catherine Coleman
Well, yeah.
concert, whatever you call those things, show, which is what it was pretty much. He was given money and a car, which you don't give to an alcoholic, and his nephew to go and see if he could get him healed. Well, his nephew didn't get healed, but he got saved. And so he becomes Christian. He marries this divorced lady who was an old line Pentecostal. Now, he shared the gospel with me. Now, we had well established the Bible. What do you think about the Bible? Well, it's holy. I had no problem with that. I believed it was holy too. And he shared with me, and apparently I got saved, but I was still in some severe bondage, really severe bondage. His wife, who usually cleaned houses, got locked out of her last job, and she ended up at the thing. And he goes out and he talks to her, says, this kid's saved, but he needs deliverance. And so she comes in and she starts sharing again about the gospel and what Jesus has done. And it boils down to, she asked me these questions. Do you believe that Jesus died for your sins, was born of the Virgin Mary, died for your sins, and was raised again from the dead? And I said, yes. And the minute I said that, it was like, to be honest with you, I heard, well, first of all, there was the struggle. The lady walks in, the devil is saying to me, you don't want to listen to her. She's ugly. Don't listen to what she has to say. Okay, so there's a spiritual battle going on inside my head.
Yeah.
But I hear the voice of God. Didn't know it was God at the time, but he says, you need to listen to her. And I did. And the light breaks, and I hear God say, oh, ye of little faith. It was just like, wow, this is fantastic. I can remember I used to hollow out old books to hide things in. And one of the books I was going to use, I asked my brother, is this any good? Can I use this book? He says, oh, yeah, it's just Protestant propaganda. Now, my brother, the altar boy, he went to Boston College. He studied under the Jesuits. In fact, Father Drinan, who became a congressman before the Pope said you can't be a congressman, that was one of his teachers. And my brother was brilliant. Anyway, so I know that all of the word of God is true. And I am, the light has dawned. And I go home and I'm thinking, I'm going to read my Bible. I mean, my mother could see, something happened here, But I go home, I sit in the living room in my favorite chair, start to read the Bible, and the whole feeling of being oppressed, being afraid, terrorized comes back upon me. And it's like, oh, God, I've lost it. So I call up my Italian friend who brought me to the office and said, you got to help me. So we're upstairs on the third floor. I got an extension phone up there. And we call the lady. And we go through scriptures. And I'm not feeling that great. But, she's very clearly announced to me and shown me in the scriptures, God says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And so that night, I actually slept in faith. And that was the start. And so I don't know exactly what day it is. So I count it as January 28th because that was the day we had to go back to school.
What year?
1973, 74. So I say 52 years ago.
Okay.
Right? Working on 53.
So did you start going to church then? And if so, what church?
The Catholic Church.
The Catholic Church.
Down the street. Listen, later on in life, I brought my mother to the Lord. If they had put a Baptist church between the Catholic Church and my mother's house, she would have gone. But they didn't, so she kept going to the Catholic Church, but she read her Bible. Now, I want to also say my mother was a pretty decent prayer warrior as long as I knew her. I mean, I knew she prayed for me. She had good reason to pray for me. So, yeah, that's what I went through. So I have this sort of... I'm just going to say it this way. The Lord spoke to me, and I'm driving home from work, and I go by this little tiny Pentecostal church, little tiny white church. I lived in my town for 20 years. I never remember this church. I just happened to take a little different route home from work to avoid traffic, and here's the church. And the Lord says to me, "Bring your cousin. He's going to get saved." And I'm looking at the times. Wednesday night. Okay, so I bring my cousin on Wednesday night. He gets saved. And he's a first cousin. We're close. He's about a year younger than me. We've known each other all our lives. Anyway, so we get there. Like I said, he gets saved, and they're telling me, usually there's a whole bunch of kids from the college you go here, but they weren't there that night. So I find out there's other Christians at the college. They find out there's a new believer at the college. And I'm going to say that was probably that was February. So they knew I was there. I knew they were there. But, getting together, that served a problem. I found out that one of the Christians was a history major, which I was. And I asked another friend, do you know this guy? He says, yeah, I know this guy. He says, well, if he's ever nearby us, can you point him out to me? So he points him out to me this one time, and I follow him in under the building. That's where they had pottery wheels for the art students. And he was going to visit this Christian friend of his that was making pots down in the bottom of the building. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm TJ Sartori. I'm a new creature in Christ. All that's old has passed away, and behold, all is made new. And they knew, about me. And of course, I knew about them. And that was the start of it. And so, we talked a lot, and they were going to have a meeting. So it's the end of March, actually, by the time I finally get to find them. And so there's a meeting this coming up Wednesday night, and it's April Fool's. And so I go to the thing, and this girl greets me, and she says, hi, my name is Sarah. You must be JT. Now, I didn't flinch at that, but, I'm TJ. I'm not JT. But
right,
anyway,
right.
But it was a memorable night because she still remembers it. And she's the girl that I ended up marrying.
Wow.
48 years ago. And I still have the hots for her. Ended up... it took me 6 years between the year I was off and the 4 years it's supposed to take you to go through college. Got married before I finished college, did my student teaching while I was married, which was wonderful. And then I had to go through the process of trying to find a job. Now, in Massachusetts at that time, they had this tax proposition, something like 2% or something like that. Anyway,
Tell me about who is running your college group there?
Who was running him? Oh, my college group, okay, was a fellow who was a student at Gordon Conwell, who came down as our InterVarsity Christian Fellowship leader, and that was Tim Keller. He had long hair and the wire glasses. He was a genuine hippie. I mean, I got pictures of him from the fellowship, and brilliant. Really. I can remember asking him, and I stumped him. I said, because I didn't even have a girlfriend, which I wanted to have, and I asked him, is a wife a promise or a gift? And I kind of stumped him on that one. Well, later on, I looked at the scripture, and he who finds a wife finds favor with the Lord. It's a gift. I can tell you I have received in abundance. My Sarah's such a girl. Anyway, but this is the guy who's leading us every week and having Bible studies with us. And
at the college or at the church?
At the college. No.
Oh, at InterVarsity.
Yeah. We all went to different churches.
Okay.
And I went to several of them trying to figure out, because I was talking to one guy, I said, because I'm studying the Reformation in my history class. And it's like, wow, these guys knew it. And I'm thinking all these Protestant churches know the real deal. And I was talking to a friend, he says, yeah, no, not quite. But anyway, I went to a lot of their churches. And finally, I'm trying to figure this thing out. And so I go to one of the members of the fellowship. He's Jewish. He's not a Protestant. He's not a Catholic. I figured, this guy's got to be a pretty good deal to listen to. So anyway, he says, why don't you come to the church I go to? They're Plymouth Brethren.
Oh.
And let me tell you, it was absolutely fantastic. The pastor, which is unusual with Plymouth Brethren, was a Bob Jones University graduate, Dallas Theological Seminary graduate, THM, I think it is. He had the master's in theology, not the
Yep.
ministry sort of thing. And he, to this day, he's still one of my best friends. And we do talk periodically. And when we were having the floods up here in Texas, he called to make sure I was okay. But Texas, and actually, it wasn't that far from where we were. In fact, my wife helped volunteer in some of the cleanup. Anyway, well discipled, just incredibly discipled. Our Sunday school curriculum were Moody Bible Institute books, things like The Holy Spirit by Charles Ryrie, which was one of his instructors. I think Salvation was, I can't remember. He had a radio show. Anyway, they were all up there in the evangelical world, and that was our curriculum. And Angels and Demons, Dickinson, I think was his name. And it was just, and the congregation was made up of, now this was the other interesting thing. This is the Jesus Revolution that's going on. And this Bob Jones graduate did a year at an Assembly of God in Tennessee. He didn't speak in tongues, but he kind of figured out, well, they're preaching the gospel basically, and so we had in the body, and it was a very diverse body. I mean, there were blacks, there were Asians. The description my Jewish friend gave me was, it has to be a church where you can give and you can get. I was pretty good on the getting, and I started to give, and helping with youth and vacation Bible school and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, and occasionally doing like communion, which is a big thing amongst our brethren. And there was charismatic Episcopalians who got thrown out of their church, charismatic Catholics. In fact, the one whose office I had gone to, he was a dear friend, and charismatic Lutheran. And there was a Church of Christ pastor, former pastor there. I mean, it was just, there were a lot of, there was a former Baptist pastor there. And
the charismatic movement in the early 70s was sort of going through all of these churches in North America, and different churches, both the individual churches and the denominations, they weren't always quite sure what to do with these people.
Exactly.
And so then they, not unusual that they'd wind up sort of in a Pentecostal group. But it sounds like you were also in some ways sort of, what was your InterVarsity? Was that college group sort of your main context at that point? And the
originally churches... for a long period of time, until basically decided on a church. Now, Sarah, who became my girlfriend, I went to her church, which was an Assembly of God.
Did her parents go there too?
No. They were liberal Protestants. And the funny thing was, and she used to be active in this liberal Protestant church, but a friend of hers who went there had found Christ, and she said, come listen to these people, and my wife got saved. And when she became a Christian shortly after that, she stopped going to that church and started going to the Assembly of God, which is where I found out there were other Christians. And her folks stopped going. Now, her parents were alcoholics. And at some point along the line, her mom got delivered and got saved. And when we moved to New Jersey, which is where Mike was born, and she went to our church that was, with the Jewish Christian fella. And there were missionary kids there too. It was an interesting assembly.
Now, you moved around a fair amount. Did you move around because of ministry or work, or how did that go for you? Were you bivocational?
Yes. Now, like I said, they had this thing where they were firing tenured teachers. So the job opportunities in New England were like, And I went to this teacher's job fair in Boston at Boston University. And they had all these different schools from all over the country. I mean, I remember interviewing for Louisiana, Shreveport. I remember the lady asked me, how would you feel about teaching in an all-black classroom? I said, I never had, but I'm willing to give it a go. I didn't apply to Georgia because they asked on their application, have you ever been arrested? And I wasn't about to reveal the details of that. Louisiana did not ask that question, so I was good. Or it was a little different. I think they said, have you ever been convicted? And I hadn't been convicted, so I was good. And so it was a lot of these different places that I went to for interviews that whole day. And one of the places I went to was for an agency. And the agency was for private schools only, independent schools is what they're also called. And he said, I can get you interviews, lots of interviews. And I said, okay. And, there was a fee, but it was reasonable. I mean, I could afford it. And let me tell you, I was working part-time at Sears, and Sarah was working for a Christian orthopedist and as a nurse, and so we weren't making a whole lot of money. Not that anything was that expensive back then. Anyway, so I start getting these. They send you letters of schools that are looking for teachers, and I went on several interviews in the New England area. I did a interview from a Christian friend for a Christian school out in Michigan. Yeah, Michigan. Evangelical. It had to do with, I don't know if you've heard of Lucy Shaw, I think. She was a Christian writer of some sort way back when. Anyway, that's Plymouth Brethren stuff. And interviewed there. Oh, and it was just outside of Detroit. And it was shortly after some of the whole riot things, and the National Guard had been in there, the tanks, and the place had so many iron bars on everything. I can remember getting gas at a place, and there was huge iron bars in front of everything. So is this a high crime rate area or something like that? Anyway, I remember after the interview, to get out, we went to Canada. We went over to Windsor and then came back across that way. Anyway. So one of the schools that I interviewed for was in New Jersey. It was a merger, an independent school, between a girls' finishing school and a boys' Episcopal trade school. They had two campuses, and I was interviewing for a science teaching job with the elementary school, which is what I really wanted to do. And, I didn't think that much of the interview, but, it sounded like a pretty good thing. I mean, New Jersey was a little strange, but anyway. I remember we were going to a wedding of a friend. We were both in the wedding party, and he calls me up from New Jersey and said, we'd like to hire you. And I'm saying, are you kidding me? I couldn't get over it. So I said, yes, that was the thing. So moving to New Jersey was a little bit of a culture shock. I mean,
where in Jersey?
A little further, I got to do my geography, a little further north of Morristown, Peapack, Gladstone, very affluent. In fact, Jackie Kennedy lived up there. Mike Tyson lived up there. The Luce family from Time Magazine was one of my students. We had the Secretary of the Treasury's kid. I mean, it was a culture shock, really. I mean, here I am, I grew up in Little Italy, seriously. In fact, I didn't even know it was Little Italy till I was in 7th grade, and the kid I shared a locker with, he says, oh, you live in Little Italy. News to me, but anyway, but it was. And here's this nice Italian kid, with his, Christian life and wife, and oh man, it was really different. But the school, the high school, which is where we ended up living, because they had apartments and what have you, they boarded horses, had horse shows, and that was one of the ways that they had income. The lower school where I taught, which was a couple of miles away, was the summer home of Senator Dryden, state senator, and he was the founder of Prudential Life Insurance. It was a gorgeous place. In fact, they used to rent it out for weddings, another source of income. And it was a fantastic job. Didn't pay a lot, but I was teaching what I liked. And they actually granted me a sabbatical and paid for some of my schooling, and I got my master's at Rutgers. So it was pretty good.
Yeah.
My aunt, who lived downstairs with my grandmother, was diagnosed with cancer. She's back there in Massachusetts, and I was always very, very, very close to her. Like I said, she helped raise me, really. I mean, I used to go places with her and my aunt that my parents couldn't afford. She taught me manners about eating in a restaurant. She used to, when she babysat me, we always used to say our prayers at the end of the night. There's two prayers I can remember from my childhood the Lord answered. One, because the Red Scare was really big, and that the communists would drop an atomic bomb on us. I mean, 3 houses down was a fallout shelter. It was the Christopher Columbus Society building, which my father and grandfather were charter members of. And the other one, my prayer was that communists would be destroyed from the inside, because I didn't want, them dropping a bomb on us or us going to war with them. And he answered that. The other was a really strange prayer. Now I got to tell you this story. It was about what was going on in the Belgian Congo. There was an uprising there. And they had to send in, I think, French paratroopers to, I think it was Stanleyville was, falling under the sway of these rebellion people. And praying for those, I remember nuns, to be rescued from that, because that was a big thing. And of course, technically it ended up happily, fortunately. But years later, in our fellowship at the college, we had a guest speaker. Her name was Helen Roosevelt. She wrote, "Give Me This Mountain." Well, guess where she was a missionary doctor? Belgian Congo. She tells the story. Now, she had been Catholic, and she had lost her faith and then found the Lord. And she went to Belgian Congo as a missionary doctor. And during the course of her time there, this one guy comes in, he's got a gunshot wound. And that was not usual in terms of, and it wasn't a bad one, it was in his arm, but she fixed it all up. So, okay, that's part of the story, but you got to wait on. So the rebels come, they take over the clinic. The leader of the rebels there beats her, rapes her, knocks out her teeth. Wow. And she says to the Lord, she says, if this man does this to me, he actually said, "You're going to be my wife." He says, "If this man hits me one more time, Lord, I'm going to deny you." And as he's there, making this announcement to the fellow rebels that she's going to be his wife, this guy comes up in a Jeep. Guess who it is? The guy that she had fixed. He said, "What are you doing with that woman? That woman's a good woman. You get your hands off of that woman." Rescued her.
Wow.
But she was one of those ones that, me as a little kid praying for, something to happen there in the Belgian Congo. I had to tell her the story. And of course, she's a marvelous person, absolutely marvelous. So I don't know. I ended up when my aunt got the cancer, that was kind of crushing to me, and I said, I think we need to go home. And our intent was, we thought, well, our parents are getting older. We'll help our parents. Well, I got 2 little boys, and we go home, and it ends up my parents and my wife's mom end up helping us. And so Michael and his brother, and later on my daughter, they all spent time with their grandparents.
Yeah.
And that was just wonderful. I mean, they loved those kids.
Yeah.
you know. So anyway, during the course of that time, the job at another private school I got was in Wellesley, Massachusetts.
Yep.
And I used to go through a section called Natick.
Yep.
Well, it was the home of, am I going to get his name right? John Eliot. Anyway, he was the missionary to the Indians there, and they were called Eliot's Indians, or praying Indians. He actually wrote a Bible in their language, and they were Christians, and they fought in the French and Indian Wars, but they were Christians. It's very interesting, some of the history back there in New England. And it wasn't a good match. My commute was like not quite an hour, but about an hour, and traffic was absolutely hard. I remember getting delayed one time by wild turkeys. There was about 12 wild turkeys going across the road, and nobody could move until they got through going through the road. Anyway, I was really happy to get rid of that job, to be honest with you. It was very taxing for me spiritually and a little bit financially too. But anyway, kind of unemployed for a little bit, and somebody approached me about being the principal of a Christian school that was just starting out. And interviewed for it, and I took the job, and I was at that job for about 4 years. It was micromanaged by the trustees, the board, and it was kind of difficult. And they had complaints about me because of my complaints about them, and I decided I'm going to resign. I actually even got my replacement for them, and she was a good friend from Accelerated Christian Education, something like ACSI, AXI, something like that. It's a Christian element educational, I don't know what you call it, conference.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Association.
Yeah, association. Anyway, so that was that. So trying to figure out, what did I do next? I made sandwiches at a deli, painted houses, a bunch of things like that. And
Michael, you wanted him to talk about this church that he started, right?
Yeah, I think we're getting close to that time.
Okay.
So
well, it was because when did you move to Millville? Because you were still going to church in Framingham, right?
Yes, I was.
Yeah.
It was just before Emily got born, so that would have been 81.
Emily, 86.
86. Okay, so it would have been 85. Sorry, 81 is before Peter. So been a while. Yeah. So the kids were always the temperature gauge, really, for us when we went and visited a church. And we had gone to a couple. We had gone to a Methodist church down in Rhode Island, which was closer to where we lived. In fact, we were on the Rhode Island line. And we'd gone to a couple of other churches, and none of them really set well with the kids. And we go by this intersection, and there on the corner is this little white church. And so we kind of pull over and look at the sign and whatever. And yeah, it definitely seems to be a Bible believing church, Community Bible Chapel, it was called. And we decided, well, let's give that a try. And we did. And that particular Sunday, we made it about, I think there were 10 people there, and the 5 of us made it 15. But the kids had a great time. And so we decided, well, let's try this again. And we ended up staying there. And had a lot of opportunities to lead Bible studies. I did a little preaching occasionally. And they ended up ordaining me as an elder, ruling and teaching elder. And
what was their denominational background?
The pastor was a Church of the Nazarene.
Okay.
He had an associate's degree from the one that's in Boston or outside of Boston. I can't remember the name of it. And Eastern Nazarene College. And little charismatic experience he had, but he was having a tough time, and he actually had I'm going to say a nervous breakdown, and left me a message note, take care of the church, basically. That was it. And so I preached that particular day, which was interesting because I had actually written something that could be preached that particular weekend. And so I started there and really went through a process of bringing other people in, to speak, people that I knew. And I knew a lot of people from having been that Christian principal, because we used to have the pastors from different places and, well-known Christian people come and speak at those for chapel. And so, I called on a lot of those guys. And this one particular friend that I had, another Italian, who was a Christian, who used to teach at another church. And I asked him to come in and preach, and he did. Another fellow was a guy named Frank Jean, a Chinese individual from China, a missionary. And he had the record of teaching the longest sermon. It was, I think, an hour and a half. And not one kid peeped out of the whole time we were there. I mean, it was
Wow.
just, this was a God thing. Anyway, this guy starts preaching and talking about and teaching, what are you looking for in a pastor? And he starts putting forward the thing that, in the church, pastors oftentimes were brought up from the body. And he, kind of continued on that vein. And then people started thinking, and he even kind of said, you may have somebody in your midst. Well, guess who that was? So they called me to be the pastor after having been, I think, about a year and a half, as I guess you'd say, interim, but not the official pastor. And so at that point, it took us about almost a year to get the parsonage ready for us 5 to move in, and then we did, and we were there for 25 years. So I moved to Texas. Yeah.
Okay.
Never a big church. It was on a corner. Parking was pretty good, but I was faithful in terms of teaching the Word of God to the best of my ability.
And the church hung in there all those years.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Did a lot of funerals, a couple weddings, a few baptisms.
Yeah.
Lots of communion, and really, it was a wonderful assembly. The body were just good people.
Yeah.
And faithful to the Lord, in the Bible.
Why'd you move down to Texas?
Number one, son, and our 2 oldest grandkids. And I had lived 60-something years up here in New England and New Jersey, and I hate cold and the snow. And then I had to have double bypass, so I bought a snowblower, but still, you got to scrape the car off, you got to de-ice it. And there were actually times when I couldn't go to work at the school I was teaching at because I was bivocational, because they hadn't plowed our street. And, I'd have to go out on some occasions and actually chop down the snowbank so that I could see around the corner cars coming so I could get out of our street.
Yeah.
And, so I'm not a fan of cold, not a fan of snow. Number one son and his 2 little ones are there in Leon Springs, part of San Antonio, I guess.
Okay.
And I visit in the summer, and I don't exactly know what the heat was, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. It felt so good in my bones.
Wow.
And we couldn't afford to live in Massachusetts. The housing costs and taxes and what have you.
Yeah.
I worked in Rhode Island at a Catholic school for a while as the token Protestant. And Massachusetts would actually tax me on the income a little bit of what I paid in Rhode Island. Yes.
Massachusetts.
Yeah. I couldn't win.
Yeah.
So we say we're going to move to Texas. Michael and his wife and their newborn baby girl of what, about 6 months, if that, say, if you're going, we're going with you.
Oh, really? So
He
so
actually,
one of your sons was in Texas already, so you moved by them. So then Michael and his wife and kids moved
they
too.
actually moved here in the house that we bought before we did.
Oh,
He moved, I think it was August, I think you moved down here.
he stepped out. I don't know why
Oh,
he
okay.
stepped
I'm
out.
pretty sure it was August that he moved in here
Okay.
and kind of got the place ready for us. And they lived with us for 2 years, just until about COVID. They were able to buy a house
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
San Antonio,
Yeah.
and actually, while they were still living here, my first Texas granddaughter was born.
Okay.
So we had two little granddaughters here with us, and then they bought their house and moved into where they are now. And I think my daughter and I don't know whether it was that Michael had visited them. I think it was they visited Michael, and he was telling them what he was paying for his mortgage on this 3-bedroom house in San
Yeah.
Antonio,
Yeah.
which was I don't know if it's really true, but I always exaggerate a little bit. But it sounded like it was about half the price of what they were paying for a 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus gas was, back then
Yeah.
it was still under $2 here.
Yeah.
So, it
Yeah.
was pretty attractive. So they lived with us for a
Yeah.
couple of years,
Yeah.
and they moved out and got an apartment here in Bernie. So
So you've lived a long Christian life, lots of different permutations of it. If someone were to come to you and say, okay, so you've lived a long Christian life, if you're glad that you have, why?
okay, the first thing is, you have to understand that during that time between when I saw The Exorcist and finally became a Christian, the Lord opened up my eyes to the darkness in this world
Hmm.
and how severe the darkness is and how great the darkness of our enemy, the evil one, is, and his minions. And that's pretty good, to be delivered from that, to be,
Hmm.
transferred into the kingdom of light.
Hmm.
And then the other aspect is, of course, eternal life, going to heaven when I die.
Hmm.
But in between, Stuart Briscoe used to talk about the fact that, a lot of Christians have this principle of, got saved, going to heaven when I die.
Hmm.
And he would say, there's kind of a lump in your mattress here,
Hmm.
which is living your Christian life. And it really stuck with me in this aspect of I'm living my life for the Lord Jesus. I try to do what pleases him. I don't always.
Hmm.
And my son Michael has even confronted me on my own sin.
Hmm.
He even testifies to the fact that if I hadn't admitted to what I had done, he probably would not have continued to follow the Lord. But, again,
Hmm.
being caught red-handed, as
Yeah.
they say, and confronted with it, I'm going to repent.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stay in that. And it was a bondage too. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity to serve, to tell people about Jesus. I mean, I love teaching the Bible. I mean, there is so many marvels in there that just, boy, if that don't make you happy, I don't know what will.
Hmm.
It's just, this is a life not easy. Um, I've had a pretty good life, not too many major concerns. My wife was a little worried when I had to have that double bypass, I
Yeah.
admit,
Yeah.
um, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But, having the privilege of bringing someone to Christ, I brought my father to the Lord using the wordless picture, the
Hmm.
different colors. In April of the year he died. He died in August, and
Hmm.
I had led him to the Lord in April. And I got to tell you, that was one of the happiest days of my life. I
Hmm.
had already led my mother to the Lord way back, wrote it in our Catholic Bible, which I still have, And my dad, I wrote it into the senior Bible that I had given to them,
Mhm.
NIV, the day that he, made that profession of faith. Um, he he had lung cancer. He had smoked for 30 years. He stopped for 30 years. He worked in a fabricating shop, which I can tell you the fumes there were probably not good for him. And
Yeah.
so he still ended up with lung cancer. The only request he had is he said, I don't want to die at night. And he died in full daylight on a Sunday.
Hmm.
So,
Now they're going to be I don't know how much Michael has told you about some of just all that goes on in this crazy little community that he participates with online. There'll be some Catholics who listen to this, and they might be a little surprised when you talk about, your parents were Catholic, but you led your mother to the Lord. What do you mean by that? I mean, because
okay.
wouldn't some of the Catholics say, well, come on, your mother, she was a good woman. She took in those kids from the neighborhood. She volunteered at the hospital. That's what he meant by those other things that he said earlier. I know a
Right.
bunch of people don't know these things, but why would you say something like that?
It's really kind of interesting because I remember my mother cooked breakfast for me, eggs and toast and tea. And my mother asked me, are you still going to be a Catholic? And I said, do you remember my life before this?
Hmm.
And I said, I need to be around these people because if I don't, I'll go back to that. And the interesting thing is, my father's view on it, because they talk,
Sure.
right? And my father's view on it was as long as he's happy,
Hmm.
because I had been so unhappy. I mean, I
Yeah.
at one point I was so depressed I had gone to a shrink
Yeah.
as a teenager,
Yeah.
and it was just depression was a problem that I had, and,
Yeah.
and still occasionally have had bouts of it.
Yeah.
Um, but that was the part of it. But the thing is, it's that aspect of knowing that this Jesus is alive now, that he died for your sins, all of them, and that you have forgiveness because of him. He was raised from the dead. It's just like, this is something wonderful. And you really need to find people who believe that. And I believe there are many Catholics, I knew some, still do, that believe that and know that and have him as their personal savior, that he's entered into their lives. They did a series amongst the Catholic charismatic renewals, and one of the prayers specifically was to ask Jesus to come into your heart. I mean, this is in their Catholic literature that they
Mhm.
had. And somebody was saying they have something like, I don't know what they're called, crucios or acts or something like that. And really, it is establish this relationship that God is offering you with him. And that the majority of it is told to you in that Bible. And that Bible and reading it and believing it can change you. I am not the person I was when I was 20 years old. Thank God. I used to say, my wife would not have wanted to have met me at that particular point. I wasn't the person for her to be associated with, but I am now. And it's continuing. I'm not who I was as a young husband. I'm an old husband now. But it's still great. It's still wonderful. And we have a Bible group that we work with, home study group. Go to a church that preaches the gospel. I'm working with seventh grade boys on Wednesdays. Got to tell you, they've changed in 10 years from when I stopped teaching. Um, but she came with me to one of the training sort of episodes and met with the girls, and realized, some of the things that kids today are going through so much different than, when our kids were young. I mean, we didn't have cell phones.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
So
so I don't know. Is that enough to
no, no, I know that
well,
question's going to come up,
yeah.
and I mean, Michael watches plenty of what goes on this channel, so he probably has a sense of it. Michael, why did you really want your father to share his story?
All right, it's a good story, isn't it? I mean,
I,
it's been,
I'm
yeah.
I'm kind
It's
of reluctant sometimes to share it because my past is not anything I'm proud of. So
well, it's funny because I've heard so many. It just my experience has been so different from a lot of the people that we meet and we speak to and things. And uh, that caused me, just to reflect a lot and think about like
Yeah,
what was different, and even just to think about like there was not ever like any stress or strain about our relatives that are, well, they're Catholic, so they're not like really Christian or anything like that. I mean, it was more like some of my cousins and stuff. It's like, yeah, they really need to. They're not even going to a Catholic church, I don't think. So they got to encounter Christ somewhere. But I guess it's just that experience of realizing that it is Christ and knowing Christ that unites you with all these different kind of people, and I got that from very young, and even you know when I was a teenager, my brothers and we started going down to the youth group at the church down the street, and then that just came to be the way to you know later on I was driving younger kids from my dad's church. I'd pick them up and bring them on Wednesday nights and stuff, and so there wasn't so much of the contentiousness and competitiveness that you kind of see, like whose denomination is better and all that stuff.
right, right.
So,
I
yeah.
think the internet in some ways fuels that because part of what has happened on YouTube is that people are always wanting to sell something. So they want to sell their little denomination or their little niche or something like that. And so then you get all of these debates, these Protestant Catholic debates or Christian non-Christian debates. And I haven't, that's not something I really wanted to do with my channel. Wanted, I really wanted people to get a chance to tell their stories and share. Um, part of the reason for this is that as a pastor, I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, that people's stories vary tremendously. People have all kinds of things that they've experienced in their life. And so much of what we tend to see through media is sort of edited and shaped and smoothed over and sort of streamlined, usually in order to sell or promote or something like that. And real stories tend not to be like that. Real stories are, they have aspects to them that don't quite fit in these usual tailored stories. And so I tend to prefer people to just share their lives and what happened to them because as you just said about the darkness, people quite naturally when they go into public, they want to put their best foot forward. And that's not a bad thing. There's nothing bad about that at all because the truth is someone who is the other way, always too eager to share all their woes, people very quickly start running the other way because nobody wants to sit there and listen to everybody's woes. But what that I think what that does, especially cumulatively in a world of screens where we know so little of each other, is that people begin to think that the struggles that they have, the pain that they have, the anger that they have, the difficulties that they have, it's only them. And the truth is, if you've lived your life and haven't had pain and struggle and anger and difficulty and bondages that, something that was sort of holding you or things that you weren't ashamed of. I mean, AA has this great line, you're as sick as your secrets. And that's a great line because and then what happens is that people then they get isolated and they begin to think, I'm the only one who deals with this. I'm the only one who is struggling. And the truth is, that's not true at all. The vast majority of people have struggles of one thing or another, Christians and non-Christians both. Christians, I mean, pastors would be out of a job if once you became a Christian, you didn't have any more struggles. I mean, what on earth is the pastor for in the church if people don't have struggles? Even though half the time the people don't want to tell their pastor their struggles because they don't want to lose status and they don't want to lose face. So that's part of the reason that I've done with my channel what I've done because as a pastor, you see people's struggles, and there's a weird thing about the internet that people seem more able to share some of these struggles to a screen than sometimes they can to a face. And, there's a little bit of illusion in there, but I think we can take that little trick and use it to our advantage to help people realize that everybody's stories are different and they're complicated and they're messy. But, I like your story because I mean, you very clearly saw a change in your life. And, I was born in 63. So, a 10-year-old can remember, what's going on around him. And, at that point between the late 60s and early 70s, I mean, society was a mess. People were struggling with all kinds of things. But it was also the case that that charismatic movement that really got going at that period. Um, a lot of people have stories like yours where, if for some reason, the established churches were really sort of struggling to deal with, I think in the 50s and 60s, you had a certain nominalism, and that nominalism sort of took hold and there needed to be sort of a break from the nominalism in order for people to, I remember Chuck Colson's book, Born Again, pretty
Right.
famous book. I mean, there's one, I paraphrase the section because, you know, because it is a paraphrase. He basically shows up to his wife and says, honey, I've become a Christian. And she's like, I thought we were Episcopalian. I mean, and I'm not putting down the Episcopalians at all, but there's this movement in the early 70s when something really went through the culture, and that has grown. Part of what you get is you get these movements when something then grows into a new. Once something becomes rote and its own nominalism, then often later then there's a whole break. And so the conversation I had yesterday was a kid who grew up Pentecostal, and he's become Roman Catholic. And we're seeing a lot of people who are sort of switching camps and switching houses, but there's often a blessing in that where they have to find it for themselves. They have to that something has to break. Soil can get hardened. Sometimes the soil has to be broken so that the new life can come out of the soil. So, I mean, and part of the difficulty is that I share so many stories in so many different directions on this channel. Then some people they get a little defensive, and then they want to play the tribal game, my tribe against your tribe. And well, you can play that game, but everybody's tribe has problems. And a lot of people in one tribe found new life by going to a different tribe. And, I don't necessarily count that as a bad thing because in many ways, I mean, you can tell the fruit. And I think you said it well. You came home and your mother and your father could look at you and say, oh, this is clearly for the better. And because they were
Oh,
probably, I mean, you're losing weight. They're probably, I mean, I'm sure your parents didn't know everything that you were doing, but they knew
oh yeah, I knew
you weren't
some.
necessarily doing right.
No, it wasn't.
So, and so I also think it's important for people to see people of different ages telling these stories because sometimes they can look at older people and say, well, things were easier back then. And it's like, some things were easier back then, but I'll tell you, in a lot of places, the 60s and 70s, those weren't good times.
No,
Things,
we saw those assassinations.
yeah,
We remember those. When was Kennedy shot? Where were you? We were
yeah,
there.
yeah,
Um, People at Vietnam. How many
yeah,
people I know who were there,
yeah,
um, and what happened because of what they were there, and
yeah,
then the whole protest.
yeah,
I mean, my brother on the campus of Boston College, federal agents used to check and see if he had his draft card
yeah,
on his person.
yeah.
Technically, I still have my draft card. It's just not on my person.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember when the draft ended and then but still, if you're a man in the country, you reach 18, you've got to you know,
Yep,
put your name in there that the government says, well, we might have to pick you one of these days and
true.
so no, no, and I don't know. You've certainly shared willingly and fulsomely. I don't know if you have any questions for me about, your son. How did Michael rook you into this?
He can be very persuasive. He
I just
basically
told
told
him
me
this is
this,
what we were doing.
what I was going to do. My
But
wife has trained me well. My mother did a good job of that too. You do what you're told.
well, and I was kind of like looking forward to this because I mean, our family is great at not fighting with each other, but we're not always great at actually talking about important things. And so, like what you were saying sometimes about this thing of just like, oh, we're going to record it, and so then it's easier in some ways to have the meaningful conversation. And so,
Hmm.
I wanted I thought it was important because I so mom and dad were just watching my thing about the boomers or whatever. And the thing is like when I put that out, it was because it was so foreign to me that I didn't realize how many other people my age have such a resentment and a disconnect from their parents. And I think that is really something that needs to be addressed while we are able to, because eventually it won't be the case, and so I think that, um, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other parents that didn't know how their actions and their words have affected their kids, and they maybe didn't get the example to have that open and repentant posture, and you just
Hmm.
kind of get passed down this thing of because I said so,
Hmm.
and if no one's ever able to really ask the questions and wrestle with the questions of why, um, then things just keep going on the same. And
Hmm.
so I think that um, I think that there's probably definitely a lot of people my age that have a uncharitable view of what their parents experience, the experience they had,
Yeah.
and I'm sure that their parents probably too would like to have that connection, and so the parents need that just as much as the people my age do.
Yeah.
Something to break the ice to get the communication going. So, and I
Yeah.
saw Sam had his dad on the other week too, and so I think that's a really good thing
Yeah.
to have. And because we can do it now, like it would have
Yeah.
been great if we could have had this when my grandparents were still around.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, my father died in 2013 and this all for me starts going in 2017. And I have thought many, many times that if my father were alive for all of this, he would love this because he pastored in Paterson, New Jersey for 36 years.
Okay.
And then he was in upstate New York for 4 years, and then they retired in Whitensville. And when he passed away suddenly of a heart attack, meeting with a guy in a coffee shop.
Oh my.
He's just right dead right there in the coffee shop. The guy didn't even break a sentence. The waitress had to kind of look at him like the guy just died in front of you, and you're sitting there still talking at him. Um, but
Wow.
uh, but my father loved ministry, and he would have, I have to give my father a lot of credit in terms of the shape of this channel because, people will sometimes ask me, where I learned this, and so much of what I learned, I didn't know I was learning. I was just learning it from my father because that's just what he did. And, I remember as a little kid, putting my father, he'd take off his shoes, they'd be sitting under the chair, and as a little kid, you put your little boy feet in, and then you walk around in your father's shoes, and kids play out what they see their parents doing, and so yeah, if my father had been alive, he would have been randoing a lot of people on his own. He would have loved this. Probably kind of driven my mother a little nuts, but because when he retired, she was like, it's like it's almost like he didn't retire. I said, well, Mom, he always loved doing ministry. He never did it for the money. And so when he retired, he just stopped doing the things about running a church he didn't like doing. And then somebody else was running the churches, and he could do all the things he loved to do. He could preach and run Bible studies and
Amen.
sit and meet with people. And so that's what he did. That's because he
Yeah.
loved doing it. So yeah. So I'm really appreciative, TJ, that you told your story. And what my experience has been with these stories is that this whole thing got started because I made Jordan Peterson, this Canadian guy, starts making gets in trouble about defined, prescribed speech, and then he does a biblical series sort of from a Jungian perspective on the internet, and I noticed a lot of people watching that, and so I thought, I've got some ideas about the Bible, and so I started making videos, and then people started coming to me and telling me their stories, and then we started sharing some of these stories on the internet, and I remember when I first started, I thought, oh, how's this going to go? But it went really well. And I
Yeah.
found that people really appreciated hearing other people's stories because they could see bits of their lives in other people's stories and they could learn from what happened in other people's lives. And so, even though it's by no means the most popular, well, it's got the most faithful following. It's that element of my channel, but it's certainly one of the things that I most love about what I've been doing over the last number of years with this thing. So.
Glad to participate.
Yeah, well, I'm glad because I don't get a lot of people your age. I get mostly people Michael's age, playing on the internet. But this is good. This
I'm
is good.
still here. I'm still at it. So
Yeah, but it is good to do these recordings while you can. I remember I had my grandmother record a bunch of things about her life and ministry on the prairies. They ministered during the Depression um, and so I've I've still got some of those tapes, and they're once people pass, can't get them.
no,
So
that's it. Yep.
so anyway, so any last thoughts, and I'll wrap it up.
Oh, well, I do think, like you were sharing about this aspect of you only get to know a person as much as they reveal their secrets. And as I said, my past life is my past life, but it wasn't a good life.
Yeah,
And in some respects, that's embarrassing.
yeah,
But the new life. that I get to have has been such a wonderful adventure, you know, and I get to share it with my son,
Yeah.
with my lovely wife,
Yeah.
with my grandkids to the best of my ability, you know.
Yeah.
The reception varies,
Yeah.
you know, but I mean, you have that experience even as a parent with your child.
Yeah.
How much of what you say to them they take or don't take,
Yeah.
kind of up to them. But
Yep.
so
Well, that's adult kids. My oldest is 34 and my youngest is 25. You learn pretty quickly what your parents had to learn, which is, yeah, those kids, they got minds of their own.
Mhm.
They're gonna do their own thing and they'll either be blessed or tripped up by it. And that's the way life works. So,
Yeah. Okay.
all right. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, TJ. And what I do with these is my channel has certain there's a thing on YouTube called a membership section, and whenever I do conversations like this, like people will have heard that I'm going to be talking to you, and then they're like, I want to watch it right away. So I started a little membership area called No Wait No Ads, where I put things right away. And that people who have no patience, then they have to pay for watching it early. They have to pay for their lack of virtue, but it'll come out to the rest of the channel. And I often make little clips of it first because the way the internet works, if one of us were Tim Keller, a whole bunch of people would watch it just because Tim Keller's in it.
Right.
But because we're all a bunch of random people are like, why would I want to hear somebody else tell their story? And so then I make little teaser videos to sort of say,
Cool.
you might want to listen to a rando every now and then. You might learn something or you might hear something that could help or bless you. So that's what I
Amen.
do.
Maybe
So,
so. Thank
all
you.
right. Well, thank you both very much,
Right.
and
Thank you.
and I hope you have a well. It's getting a little late. Well, Texas, that's not too much later. I was thinking Massachusetts, but I hope you have a blessed rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.